Okay. It's 6:30. I'll call the meeting to order. First up, is there any modifications or changes to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on to public comment. I don't think there's anybody here from the public yet, is there?
No hands raised.
Okay. So next up, review and approval for minutes January 12th and our special meeting from January 19th. Everyone had a chance to look those over and didn't find any errors. I'll hear a motion to accept them.
A motion to accept.
Cindy with the first, I have a second.
I'll second.
Heather with the second. All those in favor of accepting the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Ooh, we didn't do a roll call.
Yeah. That's why I was raising my hand, but
Getting ahead of myself here. Cindy,
here.
Leonard,
Here.
Heather,
Here.
Jason.
Here.
All right, full board is in attendance. See if I can find my meeting disclosure. Matt, you wouldn't happen to have that in front of you, would you?
I do.
Would you mind reading that for me tonight, please?
Absolutely. This meeting is being recorded. This meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Enosburg Falls is being conducted electronically in order to ensure the safety of all attendees and to maintain compliance with Governor Scott's executive order. Per H 681 signed into law on March 30th, 2020, Section 6, there is a temporary suspension of designated physical meeting location requirements of Vermont's open meeting law, VSA Section 312A1. In order to ensure that all attendees can hear clearly, your audio may be muted. When you wish to speak, you can raise your hand by submitting a chat request, or if you called in via telephone by pressing *9. Once acknowledged by the chair, please clearly state your name and then proceed with your question or comment. Please remember that when unmuted, all participants can hear any sounds in your environment. Again, this meeting is being recorded.
Thank you, Matt. Okay. Up next, we have highway mileage certification.
If the board looks in your package, you'll see a certificate of highway mileage. This is put together and sent to us each year by VTrans. It's a piece of housekeeping here, really. It's just something we need to do to send back to VTrans every year, certifying that we have the amount of mileage that they have on their records. And this partly goes into determining what we end up getting for highway assistance aid from the state during the course of the year. So nothing has changed. We have not added any new highway mileage in the past year, so it's the same, which is a total of 12.37 miles that we have in the village of Enosburg Falls. So staff recommends that the board approve the certificate of highway mileage, and then we also need board signatures on this. So when folks are able to come in, if you can sign this document and we can get it sent back to VTrans, and I think let's see, they need it before February 20th. So you've got some time. You got about 3 weeks or so. But if the board could come in sometime and sign this document, and then we can get it sent back to VTrans and we'll be all set.
Okay, sounds good. There hasn't been any changes, so I'll hear a motion to accept the mileage certificate.
A motion to accept.
Jason with the first, do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Leonard with second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. It's unanimous. Up next, we have a request from Northwest Access Television, letter of support.
Yeah, so again, look in your package, you'll see a letter from Paul Snyder. He is the director for Northwest Access Television. And Paul had sent me an email asking for a letter of support or letter of recommendation for Northwest Access Television. They're apparently going to be contacting some other municipalities that are within the service area that they provide TV access to, and try to get them to get involved with their online service via YouTube. And Paul, is looking for a written letter of recommendation from the Village of Enosburg Falls regarding those services. I told him I felt I should check with the board first to make sure that's something you want me to do. And if so, we would follow back up with him.
We currently have a contract with them, right?
We do. Yep.
Are there any regulations stipulating whether we can, as a board, support something or someone over something else? Is that an issue here?
No, I don't think that's an issue. I mean, he's not competing with anyone else. Northwest Access Television is, I mean, they're kind of the only game in town. There's no other television company that's, looking to cover our meetings in any way. So,
Matt?
For what it's worth, I'll share my perspective in having worked with them over the past year. It's been quite useful to, again, have the ability to put a link on our website of the recordings of the meetings via YouTube. That's been, I believe, a useful service for our community.
Okay, yeah, I don't see an issue with that. By the sounds of it, he's just trying to get some new municipalities involved with this, so.
yeah, not every municipality that they cover has this service. So apparently he's going to try and go around to some of these other municipalities and talk to them about maybe signing up for this, and was wondering if we would write a letter, something he could give to these other municipalities in support, and saying that we find this a useful service to have in our community.
Yeah, I don't find an issue with that. It's been useful to us. It could be useful to somebody else. What is the rest?
Go for it.
Okay, very good. I will do that. I just wanted to check with you guys first. There was not, a big rush on his end to get it done. So, when there's time and somebody asks for something like that, I prefer to check in with you guys first and make sure you're agreeable to having me write letters. Can't always have the time to do that. Sometimes deadlines are, coming up quickly and you got to just make a call about it. But in this case, there was an opportunity to talk to you about it first. So I will let Paul know.
Thank you. Okay, up next we have 2021 budget.
Yeah, so board will recall that at our last meeting last week, you did approve the water and wastewater budget. So those are approved. So we still have, however, the general fund and electric department that we need to discuss on this. There were, we'll start off with the general fund. There were some changes that were asked to be made by the board. Matt has sent out new drafts to you guys. Hopefully you had a chance to look at those. The basic changes asked for last week were decreasing the scope of work on the road paving projects. So we were eliminating Bismarck Street and also most of Church Street, but keeping the section of Church Street between St. Albans Street and Pearl Street. And then also eliminating a pretty good section of Missisquoi Street as well. But keeping the section, if I'm remembering correctly, from where the four-way intersection is by the Catholic Church down to the end of Missisquoi Street, where it turns from pavement to a dirt road. So those things have been incorporated into the newest draft that was given to the board. We're now showing a 4.91% increase in the tax rate, or 2.67 cents. That's down from the original draft that we were looking at approximately about a month ago now, which was at 5.99% increase. So we've taken it down a bit, and that's what we're currently showing now in this draft is a 4.91% increase in the tax rate. Matt, is there anything else you'd like to add for the board?
I think you covered it, John. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the versions that I presented to you. Cindy?
Question?
Well, it's not necessarily a question. I'm still having issues with Depot Street. I think it would be prudent to wait a year. We still have that scoping study, and we don't know what they're going to do to the streetscape. If we pave it and then they're going to get it all ripped up and do whatever it is they're going to do, wouldn't that be wasting our taxpayers' money? I'm just asking to hold it off for a year. I mean, there's other things going on Depot Street that may influence the paving of that street.
Yeah, understand your concern with that, Cindy. It is something that we made the engineering firm, Dubois and King, aware of back in the summer when we started discussing the project with them, when the steering committee began discussing the project with them. In fact, I think the very first meeting that we had with the steering committee and Dubois and King, I brought that issue up and told them that it appeared we were probably going to at least put a draft in the preliminary budget for the Board of Trustees to review to have Depot Street paved in 2021. So Dubois and King should be aware of that and be looking at opportunities for us to, make any alterations within that paving project that could accommodate some of the things that we're looking at in the Vital Village scoping study, so that we wouldn't have to, go back and ruin something that we just did. And I haven't heard anything back from them about that, but they're still, working on their plans for how they're going to recommend all of the different parts of the 4 phases that they're reviewing currently in the Vital Village program. But haven't really heard any feedback from them about that subject specifically, but they were told about it. But, it's a point well taken. It's something that the steering committee for Vital Village had talked about. We decided to go ahead and put it in the budget and, see what you guys' feelings were about it. It's, as I said last meeting, it's a tough situation there. And I struggled with it a little bit myself, mostly not because of the issue of, perhaps having to dig up a part of it that we just paved, because I think that there should be ways to accommodate that, because the areas mostly that were going to be altered in the Vital Village plan, if you remember, occur at the intersections of Archambault Street and some areas like out in front of where the American Legion is. And I think, at least, I mean, I could be wrong, but I think that the engineers, Dubois and King, should be able to accommodate for those kinds of expansions if we're going to do them without having to tear up at least very much. Maybe there'd be a little bit, but at least not very much of the paving job on Depot Street. But what does kind of, I have to admit, stick in my craw a little bit is what we discussed last meeting about the fact that this is a class 2 road and therefore eligible for VTrans class 2 paving grant. And on top of it, it's a state-owned street. It's not actually owned by the municipality, but we take care of it because the state won't. And it does stick in my craw a little bit that, you know, there is a grant out there to apply for this. But again, the problem with that, as I mentioned last meeting, is we're in this pandemic and we don't know when it's going to end exactly. And the program, the grant program, was canceled last year by VTrans. And so far we have not heard that VTrans is going to bring the program back in again in 2021. So, you know, there's a little bit of a risk in that too, that, you know, they may postpone it another year. Hopefully by maybe 2022, they could bring it back again, but really that's unknown too. If the state is still reeling from the economic effects of the pandemic, they may choose to cancel that grant program a third time. And we just, you know, it's just a big fat unknown. And if,
Well, that's why I'm suggesting we just hold off for a year. I mean, if we're going to pay all this money and if the grant is available, it's not retroactive. It's not going to give us our money back.
Mhm.
That's all I'm asking, just to put it
Yeah.
off for a year and revisit it.
You make some really good points, Cindy.
Where are we at in the rotation, John? Do you have any idea?
No, not really. But I'm hopeful that the fact that the state owns the road will play a role in that. And I think I had mentioned you guys last meeting. I had actually already called a couple of people last year when we had put the grant application in for that road for Depot Street, and you know, had told them that we were doing this, the grant was in, and you know, this was a state-owned road, and that it was my expectation that this grant application was going to receive very serious consideration, given the fact that the state owns it, the village owns it, and we're still, you know, going to be on the hook for 20% of it anyway. So state of Vermont, help yourself out, you know, fund your own road with your own grant, and let's get this thing done. But then, you know, then the pandemic happened and the program was canceled. So, but I don't really have an idea about, you know, where we are in the pecking order for that particular grant source right now. In all honesty, we have been very successful with many of our grant applications over, you know, the past 10 to 15 years in this community, and we have got a lot of funding out of VTrans in a variety of different grant sources, but class 2 paving as well. So we're probably not at the top. We might be a little more in the middle now, because it has been at least a few years since the last time we got a class 2 grant.
But you must have expected that they would do something if you've already applied for the grant and then they canceled it. I mean, you said we already have an application in. So you must have thought last year that we had a chance.
Well, you always got a chance. And, you know, it's our habit, unless we've gotten funding from that grant source, like within the last couple of years, then there's kind of almost no point in really trying, because you know you're not going to get at that if you got it just a year or two ago. But other than that, we almost always put a grant application in every year on that class 2 just to see what happens, just to sort of take your chance. You never know what's going to happen. And one time we did get lucky with that, even though we were not at the top of the pecking order, we were pretty far down. And it was actually Orchard Street back in 2006. We put a grant application in. We were turned down initially, but later in the year, in the fall, they came to us and said, hey, look, we had a couple of municipalities tell us they couldn't get their projects together in time to meet our deadline for completion. So they had to turn down our award. Enosburg Falls, if we awarded you this money, we thought we were going to give to these other 2 municipalities. Would you be able to take it, run with it, and make sure this project get done next year? So we said, yeah, absolutely. We will take that money. And so, that one, you never know. It's just strange things like that can happen sometimes. And we did get lucky in that case back in that year in 2006 with it.
So there's always hope.
Oh yeah, there's always hope. And yeah, and I would hope that, if we did turn in another application for this, whenever they reintroduce the program to funding again, they would take a very serious look at that application.
Another issue is we have quite a few class 2 roads, Orchard Street, Depot, Pearl, and St. Albans, right? Do you have any more? Or West
Yeah,
Road and West Enosburg Road too, right?
yeah,
And those roads
yes.
are fairly good.
I think you've named them all, Sam. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is our last class 2 that's kind of in bad shape. So it's kind of the last one that needs it,
Yeah, and it's an odd one because technically it is not really a class 2 road, but for some reason the state, and I think the reason is because they own it. The state has designated Depot Street as a class 2 road, and I think the reason is because they own it, and automatically if the state owns a road, it's considered at least a class 2 road, if not a class 1. But technically it's not. Depot Street isn't really a class 2 road. To be a class 2 road, both ends of the road have to be ending on a state route. That's what defines a class 2 road. So like Orchard Street, for example, it starts on, well, depending on where direction you're coming from, but if you're coming from the west, it starts on Route 105 just before Maple Fields, and then it ends on 105 on Main Street. So Depot Street doesn't do that. One end of it is on a state route 105 Main Street, but the other end of it is on a municipally owned road, Pleasant Street. So it's kind of odd that it does fit the class 2 status, and I think the reason the state has it that way is because the state owns it and they acknowledge that they own it, and by definition it has to be at least a class 2 road if the state owns it. But it does qualify, and that's all that matters.
Cindy?
So when we vote to accept this and whatnot, does it have to be unanimous?
No, we typically try to do things by consensus, but if we cannot reach consensus, then Sam may ask you guys to vote on it. Typically that hasn't happened. That's not the way we've done things. We try to reach consensus about an issue, but if we have a division in the board on this and some people want to have it in there and some don't, Sam may ask you to take a vote on whether you want to keep it in the budget, in which case it would be a majority.
Okay, thank you.
When is the deadline usually due for these class 2 grants if the program did reopen?
Yeah, in the past, they've been, I think the end of April is when they've been due in the past. But, we just haven't heard anything. Usually by now, we've, heard at least, we're going to have the grant applications due by, this date. And, here's when the actual form is going to be available to municipalities to fill out. But we've heard nothing from them at this time. So I'm not real optimistic that they're going to bring it back this year. But you never know, maybe they'll bring it in later in the year or something, if they feel like things have gone better economically than they thought that it was gonna. Maybe they'll have an application deadline of, May or something instead.
From my experience with other state level grants recently, that I'm seeing the same thing, John. They're either not saying anything or there's the potential of postponing. So, yeah. What I wonder is, will Depot Street be okay for a year? For those of you who know more about roads than I do.
Well, it will be drivable. As you guys know, it's not in good shape now, and that was part of my concern of, at least putting the budget in front of you as to what it would cost to pave Depot Street if you chose to do it this year. It's in pretty rough shape, and that's only going to get worse. We know that. And you guys will recall a couple of years ago how quickly Orchard Street, hate to keep bringing up Orchard Street, but
I'll tell you guys a story about, it's pretty much exactly the same.
yeah,
And I said, Orchard Street's not that bad. Roughly
yeah.
after we close the budget, mud hole. So in my,
Yeah,
if we're considering it being that bad, then a lot of times it's better to bite the bullet and get it done. Because I think even if we did wait for a hopeful grant, it's going to be at least 2023 before pavement goes down on that road. So it's not really the question of one more year. It's kind of the question of 2 more years, or at least 2 winters.
And we're also not sure about any Vital Village things, like when they would happen or anything.
well, that's a good point too, Jason. We will have more detail about what things would look like along Depot Street based on the plans that, and remember, those were just, very beginning plans that were done in the original Vital Village project for Depot Street. This will put a little more flesh on the project, but it's still, even at that point, it still wouldn't be ready to go out to bid next year or anything. We really need engineering plans in order to actually put the project out to bid. So that's a good point too, that, we would have to go through another process with Depot Street to get to the point that we had an actual engineer evaluate the more refined plans that Duke and King will have put together by July of this year, and also produce a set of bid specs so that a contractor could actually bid on the project. And that's another process too.
And then there could be other roads that are like dire need. So
And Pearl, or
you'll have everything all at once if we don't do little at a time.
Yeah, I guess to answer your question, Heather, I think the road will last, another year. I mean, one way or another, we will make it last. And, even if it split wide open like Orchard Street did a couple of years ago, we'd get a patch in there and, we would do our best to hold things together. And we can do that. I mean, we know how to do that. We've done it before. So, I mean, we could get it through another winter, maybe even 2 winters. But, you know, I think it's a question of, are you guys okay with that? Do you want the road in that condition? Or do you want to take care of it in just one fell swoop and get it paved and in good order again? And then hopefully with some of the alternative plans that Dubois and King will be looking at, you know, they can make accommodations for doing the other additional work later on when we get funding to advance some of the plans that are within the Vital Village portion of it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember on that Vital Village phasing project. I can't recall there being any major modifications to the street other than bump outs.
Yeah, there were bump outs, and there was a pretty big widening of the intersection at Archambault Street. And then they had, I'm trying to remember too, off memory, because I don't have the plan in front of me, but I think there were also some more defined crosswalks along Depot Street that, you know, just looked nicer, and I think they were incorporated into some of the bump outs there. So, I mean, a lot of it was aesthetic stuff, but some of it too, I think, was intended to help with some of the turning radiuses for some of the larger vehicles traveling down Depot Street.
And pedestrian safety.
And pedestrian safety, yeah.
It's definitely concerning trying to cross the street. I wonder, so if we waited a year, is it realistic to assume that the scoping study, they'd be at the point with the engineers to be able to give recommendations for next budget?
Oh, there, Matt
It's
just,
beautiful.
oh, lost it. There it is. Yeah, there you go. So there you can see the renderings that were done in the original study. And you can see there's kind of an expansion of this intersection here with Archambault Street. More defined crossings here, more defined crossings here, some bump outs. And yeah, there's another bump out here down in front of the American Legion building, which isn't there now. You got some more formal signage for the town-owned parking lot next to the Opera House. Yeah, so I mean, it's not like, you know, huge, but you know, there's a number of things in there: bump outs, more formal crosswalks, widening of the intersection with Archambault Street, a more formal sign for the parking lot.
More or less additions rather than alternatives to what is existing there.
Yeah, yeah, that's probably a good way to describe it, Sam.
So, I mean, if we had bid specs out for all these projects and everything was, you know, ready to be done next year, I would have some hesitations as far as making sure the Vital Village project's getting incorporated with this street paving project. But again, I can't see that happening super soon anyway, within the next couple of years. And so, and I think that they're not going to ruin what we're going to do. I mean, they may add some more pavement to the intersection of Archambault, but for the rest of it, it's mostly aesthetics or landscaping or bump outs that are additions that would be over the pavement, not replacing it. So I personally would like to see that street get done. It's been bad for a long time. You know, I mean, we threw a Band-Aid on it last year, but yeah,
There's a lot of businesses on that street and a lot of traffic.
very busy street with a lot of people coming in and out of there from a lot of different communities, and that's one of the worst roads in the village. Well, I would say besides the Missisquoi extension, I would say that is the worst road.
For these, just remind me, so when we put the street projects into the budget, are people voting on them individually?
No, we will, the article will be written as one article to support the entirety of whatever you you as a board choose to have for road paving projects in 2021. And it has to be a yes or no vote. So people won't be able to say, well, I'll vote for Depot Street, but I'm not going to vote for Missisquoi Street. It'll all be combined into one vote for one single dollar amount to provide renovations to whatever streets you guys ultimately decide on.
John, another question I have is, since parts of Pleasant are class 2, where the train tracks go, make the entire Pleasant Street class 2?
I don't believe Pleasant Street is, well, Matt, can you remind me, is there something weird with Pleasant 2? Is a part of Pleasant Street considered a class 2 by the state? Do you remember anything on that?
When we were trying to reconcile the certified mileage and the thing you guys just reviewed a few minutes ago, the state had Depot Street drawn from the intersection of Main and Depot to the intersection of Pleasant and Elm. They had that as the designation of Depot Street, which met the criteria of connecting to a state road on either end. But the miles that were associated with it were only the distance that is Depot Street. That's the anomaly. So we weren't really sure whether or not they were calling that portion of Pleasant Street that went from Depot to Elm Depot Street because they weren't including it in the total mileage count. But that's the way they had it drawn on their diagram.
Yeah, it's weird that, as I had said to you guys earlier tonight, I mean, technically Depot Street shouldn't be a class 2 road.
Maybe that's how they made it. They drew the other end to the state road.
Yeah, I think that's, plus they own it. And yeah, so it's strange. I've never seen that before, the way they tried to do that.
I think we'd have difficulty getting grant support for paving on any portion of Pleasant Street.
But you guys have a portion, that northern portion of Pleasant Street in the budget right now.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we should just keep the roads that we have, that we talked about last meeting, for right now. But again, we can keep discussing it if you want.
Just wish I knew like more of the timeline on the other end of just like the scoping study and when they're going to have that, everything's going to be planned out for Depot. Because like I get what Cindy's saying about if you're going to be making some alterations in the near future, then like let's do it all together. I think I've even talked about that in another meeting.
I think it's one of the last phases, though. I think Depot's one of the last phases.
I think at the, I mean, they should, at the end of this current phase of the study that they're in, Heather, provide an analysis and a budget for next steps with this. So the next step would be to actually have an engineering study done along with together documents as part of that engineering study. And they should be able to provide a timeline and a budget for how long it would take to do that engineering study and what the cost would be. Now, funding that is another question. Then we'd have to have the discussion about, you know, okay, whatever amount that ends up being, 25,000 or 30,000, whatever it is, you know, how does the village want to fund it? Are you willing to fund it as a board out of the village's general fund, or do you want staff to see what we can find for grant availability and start putting grant applications in? You know, all of that ties into the timeline, because when you apply for grants, there's no guarantee you're going to get them either. You may not get them. So,
Matt, did you have something?
I was just going to clarify, part of the reason that we're doing the scoping study that we're doing right now is that is a requirement from VTrans to qualify for the bike ped grant program, which is the same program that was used to get funding for the Elm Street sidewalk project. And completion of this scoping study gives us all the requirements that allow us to apply for V-Trans bike ped grant for some of these streetscape improvements for Vital Village. And the way that they structure that now is they do the design specifications work and the construction work, kind of roll that all into one grant project. So when the Elm Street project grant was awarded, it gave us funds to do the design engineering and also the funds assumed for the cost of construction. And that's, I think, if we were to seek a bike ped grant for any of the Vital Village improvements through the bike ped program, that would be kind of rolled together as a design build grant program.
Yep, thanks, Matt. That's an option. It's an option we took with the Elm Street sidewalk program, which is still ongoing, as you guys know. But yes, Matt, thank you for that. That is an option as a potential grant source.
All right, so what are we all thinking? Leonard, you've been awfully quiet tonight. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I feel that we should go ahead with it. Like you said, bite the bullet, get it done.
I just think I would have a hard time explaining to somebody why Church Street is getting paved and not Depot.
Well, only part of Church Street's getting paved, the pretty rough part.
Yeah, I still
But yeah,
condition than Depot with way less traffic.
and that's definitely one thing I thought when I was doing my drive around is, especially the portion from Archambault to Main Street is really, really rough. I mean, because we patched it last part of Depot last year. It does get a lot of traffic, and there's a lot of new businesses on there. So when I was thinking about it, when we talked about it last week or the week before, it's definitely thinking about that. A lot of heavy traffic.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would like to see it paved, but there's good points about waiting. I don't know.
Are there any other details that I can offer fiscally that will help the board with a decision? Do you want to drill into the specifics about what that individual component does to the tax rate or anything of that sort?
Like what effect Depot Street has on the tax rate if we were to
We started at 525,000 with the original scope of work. With the request that you made last week, we've brought that down to 282,000. That has a total impact for future years of about 2.8 cents on the tax rate, and of that 1.18 is the Depot portion. So it's not quite half, about 40% of the project.
And overall, that would account for what? 1.5% of our increase in the overall tax rate?
The total project at 2.8 cents would be about 1.4% of the increase. Yep. So less than 0.5% if you were to drop out Depot Street on the percent increase of the tax rate.
Should we go to a vote?
Were there any other things besides paving that you needed to review on the revisions we made? For instance, I just want to bring to your attention, I took from the board the impression that you were interested in diving a little deeper into the reserve balance. So those long range forecasts that I provided made the assumption that you were going to bring things down to $100,000 minimum fund balance as opposed to 200,000. Don't know if that's kind of meets your expectations, or you want to make any other kind of adjustments in your forecasting associated with that, or want to talk about any of those forecasts.
Yes. Do we want to get Depot Street out of the way first?
We can leave Depot Street.
What's that?
I said we can leave Depot Street
Leave-
on there.
Okay, so everyone agrees that we're gonna pave Depot Street this year or next year? We're gonna budget for it?
Yes,
Okay,
Yeah, it'd be this year. If we budgeted for it this year, we would do the project this year.
yeah, I forget, it's New Year now. Okay. All right, yes, Matt, moving on from then. Can you just tell us a little bit about the accounts, the high interest accounts that you plan on reducing?
Okay, so one of the scenarios that was discussed was retiring some debt service from some of our commercial loans that have higher interest rate. We have 2 loans which are a little bit higher than the interest rates we've been borrowing over the last couple of years. One of those is a project that was done on, forgive me, my memory is slipping. Let me pull that up.
Water tower?
Water tower was one, but it wasn't the big one or the high interest rate one. Sorry. Just one moment while I open that up. I don't want to misspeak. Our highest interest rate loan right now for the general fund is the School Street water line and paving project. Let's see. That was done in 2010. It was financed for 15 years. So we're 10 years into a 15-year loan on that. So we've got 5 years remaining. It's at 4.85%. If we were to retire that debt early, it would require about $14,000 in principal payment from the general fund, and would save about $1,500 in interest if we were to retire that early. The anomaly about that, because it's a loan that is shared by the water department and the general fund, they both make a portion of the monthly principal payment. If the general fund satisfies its principal obligation early, that does mean then that the water department will continue to need to make the full monthly payment for the remaining shortened term. So its debt service will accelerate a little bit too. The water department would have 2 options. It could go on paying the minimum required monthly payment, and that will shorten them by about a year, or it too could retire its portion of the debt early. It has reserve funds that, if the board wished to, you could dedicate to that. That would require about $50,000 of the $200,000 reserve that the water fund has if you wish to retire the entire loan 5 years early. That's one of the loans that I would suggest considering. The other one is the Water Tower Road paving project. That project was done in 2014. It was financed for 15 years. So we're 6 years into it, have 9 years remaining. There's still a substantial balance remaining on that. There's $191,000 remaining principal balance on that loan. So if you were to accelerate payments on that, you wouldn't be able to retire it, but you could certainly put a lump sum down from some of your reserve funds, and that would lower your interest on the back end of the loan. So you'd feel the impact of that in starting in about 2026. You'd see a significant reduction in interest at that point.
Now, would you be contributing to that loan annually, or would that just be a lump sum right now and then maintaining our current payments?
You could do that a couple of ways. You have all the options at your disposal with regard to that. The way I modeled it in that one forecast that I provided, which said retiring debt service, was I made the assumption that out of the $200,000 unrestricted fund balance, you might wish to put $50,000 toward debt reduction. So I used 14,000 for that first loan we talked about, and I used 36,000 toward this one. And that shortened the term of that water tower road project by about 2.5 years. And I did that as a lump sum all in 2020. But you could do $10,000 a year over the next 5 years. If you didn't want to tap too strongly into the reserve immediately, you could spread that over time. If ultimately you're going to spend $50,000 out of reserve, you get more result by doing it up front than you do by spreading it out over time, just because of the time value of the loan interest.
Yep, I think that's the way to go then. So that's assuming that we're not going to accrue any extra funds, say our projects come in under budget next year. So it's possible that our general fund could increase. I mean, not from what it is right now, but from leftover.
Are you speaking about the paving project?
Yeah, because typically what I've noticed is that they usually come in under budget.
Yeah, if for instance, we estimate the 2021 paving projects to cost 282,000, and we go for a bond issue for that amount, and it comes in lower, like the last two paving projects did, we would be restricted in terms of what we could use those reserve funds for. The board might remember we had this discussion when we were first determining what to do with the 2019 excess. You can either increase the scope of your project that fits in line with what the voters originally approved and spend the remainder of the bond proceeds. You can go back to the voters and seek permission to use those unspent funds for a different purpose. Or you can use those funds to retire the principal of that loan and only that loan. So right now we have still some reserve funds from 2019, and we also had some reserve funds from 2020 bond issues. Those are being used to pay down principal on those bonds.
Okay. So yeah, what does the board think? Do you want to go ahead and use some of that fund balance to retire some of those high interest loans? Because they are kind of high compared to
Good
what
to me.
now. And I think the sooner that we can kind of get on the backside of that plateau, so to speak, for the tax rate, the better, because there's going to be new projects coming up, I'm assuming.
And to put into perspective, the difference between using that $50,000 to retire higher interest debt service as opposed to using the $50,000 to pay for a portion of this year's paving project. In other words, if it's $282,000 worth of paving and you only get a bond issue for $232,000 and you pay the other $52,000 out of reserve funds, I compared those two, doing that, lowering the bond requirement for this year's project versus lowering the higher debt service loans. You save about 0.8 cents on the long range stabilized tax rate by retiring the higher interest debt service, obviously, because you're paying down a debt that has a higher interest rate. We're still assuming that based on the current market conditions that our bond issue for 2021's project will be very competitive and probably not as low as the 2020 bond issue interest rates, but certainly not as high as those ones we're talking about retiring.
Right. What's the current ballpark range for bond interest rates?
For this modeling, I used 2%. We actually got 1.52% on the 2020 bond issue, but that was an all-time record low for the Vermont Bond Bank. They've never had a bond issue at a lower interest rate than that.
Yeah, I think we should go ahead and just retire some of that debt service. Matt, if we went ahead and used some fund balance from the water fund to pay off the remaining principal, would we have to do anything special because we already approved that budget?
John, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe so. That's, I think, within the purview of the board's discretion to determine what to do with those reserve funds.
Yes, that's correct, Matt. board has discretion regarding water and wastewater department. And if you choose to take some of the fund balance in the water department to offset some of the costs on paying down future debt, that's perfectly within your rights to make that decision.
And I think the water fund has a pretty healthy fund balance right now. So if it was up to me, I would say let's go that route. We'll retire the joint loan and put the rest on principal for the water tower project, just like Matt said.
What I would suggest, just so that we have a very formal action to have on our records, is I can come back to the board with a specific resolution that calls out the details of that, so you can take an action on it and a vote, and then there's a clear chain of documentation for pulling those reserve funds and how you're applying them.
Sure, that sounds good. Okay, was that it on general? So do we want to wait to approve general fund until you get that?
That's not going to change the nature of the 2021 expenditures or proposed tax rate. That will have an impact on the future stabilized tax rate forecast that we've been looking at. So if the board is okay with the assumptions we've made, which is to actually request $282,000 bond approval from the voters for purposes of the 2021 paving projects as they've been modified, and to, I think the other assumption I'm operating on with this draft was that you wanted to move some of the unrestricted funds in the general fund to a assigned category for equipment replacement, to move $20,000 from unrestricted cash in the bank to an assigned purpose for equipment replacement. Then that would also not have any impact on the 2021 tax rate. And this draft that you have in front of you would remain consistent, which is a 4.9% assumed increase. Again, bear in mind that whatever does happen to the grand list can move that around a little bit. You know, the goal is that we're going to raise $554,850 in tax revenue. So if the grand list has any adjustments upward or downward, that will push the rate around.
We usually confirm our actual tax rate in what, just September?
Yeah, end of August, and yeah.
Yeah, typically at our first meeting in September, we bring back the question of what the final tax rate is going to be to the Board of Trustees. And as you guys know, oftentimes things happen during the course of the year. In recent years, they've actually been favorable to the tax rate, and we've been able to keep the tax rate lower than originally anticipated when we were doing the budget in March. Not saying that'll be the case again this year, but we have a number of times had that happen to us, which is good. It's really nice when you can do that and have the budget and the tax rate come in a little bit lower than what you were expecting. But that's maybe the one benefit out of waiting so late in the year to collect taxes is, you know, when by the time we get to that point, that first meeting in September, we know pretty much how much money we're going to have spent for the year. It's not really much of a guessing game anymore. We can nail it down pretty hard.
Heather, did you have a question?
I did. On the topic of the general fund, but something different, if we're able to go on to something else in there.
Yeah, what did you want to talk about?
I was just wondering where the situation was with the Historical Society and the Select Board, and if we need to revisit the request.
I think that's coming up. We're going to talk about that later, aren't we, John?
Yeah,
It was in the manager's report. I just wasn't sure before we approved or not this budget.
short answer to your question, Heather, I would say there's no action this board needs to take on that request. We'll be discussing that in executive session.
All right. So if the general fund looks good to the board and nobody has any further comments or questions or discussion items,
I motion we approve the general fund budget.
I'll second.
all right. Cindy with the first, Jason with the second. All those in favor of approving the general fund budget, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. All right, we got the big one out of the way.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next item we had under the 2021 budget to discuss was the electric department. Matt did receive some updated final power supply numbers from VEPSA staff. The power supply figures, which are final now, these are the final numbers from VEPSA, have dropped some. They dropped $10,000 from the last draft that the board saw. Other than that, there are no significant changes within the electric department draft that the board currently has. Matt, is there anything else you want to add to that under electric department?
I would just say that, as John said, we've brought the operating deficit down to an estimate of $267,142. That's down from 276 because of those changes to power supply. There is not a cost on the capital projects list associated with the power factor analysis that was discussed earlier. I did have one more follow-up discussion with Dave Westcom, the department head. And at this point, he's fairly confident that he can move that project along with some assistance from some other VEPSA member utilities without any significant initial costs for the analysis. The costs are more likely to come into play when we actually get some recommendations on things that can be done to improve the power factor. That's when there may be some need to acquire equipment and monitoring devices that might help us to make improvements to the power factor. And that's something that would be we would probably know enough about that to be able to have intelligent discussions in preparation for the 2022 budget year in terms of looking at that as capital projects. So I think based on what I've heard from him, and John, please add your point of view if it differs. I don't see any benefit to putting any kind of a placeholder right now on the 2021 capital project list for that analysis work. I think we can do that fairly inexpensively.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. I don't think we should put too much more time into that issue. I think we'll be able to resolve and at least get a basic analysis done of that issue, maybe something to consider for next year.
The last two things that I would add for the board's clarification, we've had some fairly extensive discussions at this point about the process of preparing to get short-term financing to restore some of our operating cash that has gone out toward the FERC relicensing project over the last couple of years. To date, we've invested $176,000 in the project from from operating reserves. We have another $265,000 proposed to be spent in 2021. That's about $440,000 worth of operating funds that are being tied up by that project by the end of 2021. We believe that we have a pretty good understanding of what steps we'll have to go through in order to make sure any short-term financing is not disqualified from rate analysis for any future rate cases. We have to do a couple more steps to verify that with our attorney and the Department of Public Services attorney. But I'm pretty confident in saying to the board that we have a working plan in place to try and restore some of those cash reserves that have gotten very thin for the electric department. The other thing that I've been working since we last met and spoke is paving the way and answering questions for VEPSA about the feasibility of proposing a 2021 rate case to the department for the electric fund. We have now audited results from 2020 that VEPSA can use as a comparison to our 2019 baseline and determine whether or not there's a material change in our baseline values that we can present to the department and what kind of a rate adjustment that might result in. So that if the board wishes for us to continue to pursue investigating that, we should be able to come back in the next several weeks with some preliminary ideas of what that kind of a new rate case submission might look like for a % rate increase in 2021. If it got submitted, reviewed, and approved in 2021, it's quite likely to have little impact on 2021, just as we estimated for 2020. We were very fortunate in terms of the speed at which the 2020 rate case went through, and we were actually able to implement that in our July billing cycle. I would say that that's an absolute best case scenario, and more probably we might get 1 or 2 months or even 3 months worth of revenue recovery if we go through the process and submit another case for 2021. So it won't significantly change revenues based on what's currently forecasted without a rate increase, but there is the potential to close that gap a little bit if we do go forward with a rate case.
Is it Steve Farnham who we spoke to last year about this? Have you reached out to him at all to see what he thinks?
Yes, we've been through 3 iterations already of the comparison of the baseline between 2019 and 2020. I've answered all the questions for him that he's had so far. He's really good at asking me the questions that he knows the department is going to ask him, so that we can lay side by side the costs that were used in our last rate case and the costs that we now have experienced since a year has passed, and be able to answer intelligently to the department any questions they'll have about what's driven those changes in cost. And he feels pretty confident that we've got a solid baseline to put forward.
Okay, so we're not waiting on any other information before we can solidify this budget?
I don't recommend showing any kind of a increase in revenue recovery at this stage. What we do recover if we go through a rate case will have much more impact in 2022. And I think that you'll have the benefit of looking at a 2022 budget without a large deficit to start with.
Hope for the best, but plan for the worst, right?
Yes.
One other thing I'd like to bring up regarding the electric department, if the board is still agreeable. We had talked a couple of meetings back about trying to resolve the issue of getting another digger truck. As you guys recall, one of our employees had a serious accident at the end of the summer, and we still need to replace the digger truck that was totaled as a result of that accident. We had talked about getting a used digger truck from Franklin Telephone Company that they had available to be able to use for at least a couple of years, if not longer, and sort of see how that equipment performs. And we've been using it and evaluating it for about a month and a half or so now, and it seems to be in decent working order. The amount we had talked about purchasing that vehicle from Franklin Telephone Company was for $9,000. So if that is still part of the plan and what the board would like to see done, if we could have a formal motion from the board, because that is more than under our procurement policy, then the manager has authority to approve. So if that is part of what you'd like to still see in the electric department, I'd like to see a formal motion to approve that purchase.
Matt?
Just to remind the board, we're holding $10,000 on the capital project list for that purpose. And John and I spoke about this. it was my recommendation that we leave that at $10,000, even though the agreed purchase price would be 9,000. We do have to do some things like put a radio in the truck, get it decaled, etc. So that extra $1,000 would take care of some of those incidental costs after the vehicle's purchased.
Yep, I am familiar with that truck, and last time I spoke with Dave Wescombe, he felt pretty confident that would perform well for him. So I would recommend making a motion to purchase that and use that as our digger truck.
I make the motion, we purchase it.
Leonard with the first, I have a second.
I'll second.
Heather with a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay.
Great, thank you. So unless I misunderstood, you guys did approve the general fund, correct?
Yes.
So how do you feel about the electric department? Do you guys feel comfortable with approving the electric department in its latest rendition?
I think now that we got some solid numbers back and finalized on some capital projects, I would be comfortable accepting that.
I
So
make a motion to accept.
Matt?
1 second before you do that, just to clarify. So we're talking about the budget that will propose a $267,000. Sorry, back to that page. $267,142 operating deficit and a $28,889 positive change in fund balance, with the assumption that we can get short-term financing for project costs.
And staff is comfortable with that.
Yeah, and we'll obviously continue to pursue the merits of a rate increase for 2021 with VEPSA staff and see where that path leads us and keep the board updated with that as we progress.
Yeah, sounds like we're gonna have to go with that then. Okay, so Cindy, did you have the first?
I motion to accept the electric budget.
Cindy with the first, I have a second.
I'll second.
Jason with a second. All those in favor of accepting the electric budget, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. All right,
Thank you.
budget season's over.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, guys. So with that, we do have all 4 of our budgets approved for the village budget for 2021. We do have a few other things I would like to bring up to you guys before we move away from this subject, not specifically having to do with the budget, but having to do with the annual meeting and annual report and tying up some loose ends there. So the first is Heather had put together a dedication for the annual report, which she had sent to me and Matt. And I think Matt is going to put that on the shared screen to see if that looked like it was something the board was in favor of having it as the dedication. Are you able to pull that up, Matt?
I am. Everybody see that? Can anybody see that?
Yeah.
I can
Okay.
see it.
Sorry, I'm busy reading. Should we include the fence?
Yeah, I was wondering about that when I was putting this together. I know there's projects that I did not list. I wasn't sure how many items to add. But maybe there was definitely substantial work in Lincoln Park that happened recently. And also the replacing of the fence. Before that was even putting in the daffodils, and there's been some other work as well. And I was also thinking of the lights in Lincoln Park. There's just been so many amazing projects.
Even go broad with it and just say including all the beautiful work done to done to Lincoln Park or in Lincoln Park. I think we should definitely include defense, the Doughboy, all that stuff, because a lot of people worked really hard for that.
Could certain organizations be named or?
Well, the reason I didn't is because like it was, as was brought up in previous meetings, there's just a lot of organizations and a lot of individuals and.
I mean, to give like specific credit.
My concern is length and unintentionally leaving somebody out if we start listing.
I agree with Heather that it should be all as, not vague, but as generic as possible.
Or you have to get them all, or
Because we can't,
I-
we don't want to leave
Yeah.
someone out.
I think if we start listing people or businesses, that's where it would be more personally felt too if we named a business and didn't name another business, because that's also advertising. And it's really hard to get the names of every single individual who helped in this project, or the various projects.
so we usually get photos, right? Or at least a photo.
Yeah, typically we do our dedications to an individual. This is a little bit different. We're doing a dedication to sort of a group of projects in the community. So I had asked Heather whether she had a photograph in mind that she felt could represent this, whether it was, you know, a photograph of the fence on Lincoln Park or something else. So I don't know, Heather, if you had some time to think about that.
I did see that email. I didn't have a picture of myself or necessarily one in mind. Depending on the space and the cost, we could even do like a banner with 2 to 4 pictures across the page. That can be done nicely.
A collage.
That's what I was thinking. If we wanted to reach out to a lot of these groups and try to get any good pictures they may have, including, you know, the Masonic Temple, things that happen in the park.
What about the Gaga pit?
Yeah,
Oh yeah, that.
and we can,
See, like there's a huge list. It's
Right.
great.
Yeah, we got to be quick because we're running out of time. We gotta have this. I mean, we got to have everything for Matt to compile in here by next Monday.
Maybe we should reach out to Yvonne Keogh. She might have pictures of a bunch of these different things that have gone on being part of the rec committee.
Yeah, I think it's possible. When you say next Monday, do you mean the 1st or do you mean the 8th?
I mean, the first, next Monday.
Okay, this next. Okay.
Yeah, so in a week.
And one more thing about this little write-up, it's great, but business should be pluralized, businesses.
Businesses. Okay. I'm trying to pull up the draft that it on my computer so I can make an edit, so I can make sure to attend to this right away.
Oh, it looks like Matt's fixing it.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that works. Businesses. And then we should say something about more of the stuff that's specifically Lincoln Park focused, I guess.
Stan?
Yeah.
Quick input on that for me would be is if you took a picture of the fence onto the across the park to the fence to the Masonic Temple, that covers a whole lot of people and a lot of businesses that donated stuff, volunteers that worked on multiple things. Just as a suggestion, it's your call.
So Heather, would you be able to reach out to some of these local groups and see if you can find pictures and maybe throw together a little collage?
Yeah, I can do that.
I think that'd be the way to go. Just kind of highlight some of the projects without specifically naming anybody. That way we don't accidentally leave anybody out.
Everybody know how to spell daffodils?
Right there.
Yeah. I
Only
just
one
want to
L
read
at the end.
Wordsworth.
those are the things I heard you mention. I don't know if anybody,
Oh, the lights in the park, the bridges.
It's good to me.
Heather, I'm happy to help work on gathering photos as well and starting to kind of draft a collage. I realize there might not be an opportunity to necessarily present this at another board meeting, but if the board were comfortable with, after Heather and I have kind of gathered some stuff up, just emailing out a draft to the board, and if you like the content and the imagery, letting us move forward with that.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Okay, so Heather and Matt then are going to continue to refine the dedication, but we got the basic parts of it in place there. And it looks like it's in good shape and should be a nice addition to the annual report. Another thing I wanted to bring up to you guys is the trustees annual report. I sent a couple of different drafts to you guys. Haven't heard any feedback from anybody. Is that last draft I sent to you guys look okay to you?
Yeah, Matt, I got the chance to read it, and it looks good to me.
Be honest, I haven't read it yet.
Okay.
Not the latest draft.
Okay, the only thing that I changed in the first draft from the second draft was I cleaned up a couple of grammatical mistakes I saw, and then I added a section on the adoption of the new park use policy. It occurred to me that should definitely be in there because that's a policy change that you as a board made, and we want to make sure we get that in there as part of the trustees report as well. So that was the changes I made from the first draft to the second draft.
Okay.
Looks good.
So
All right.
not hearing anything disapproving. So can I take it you guys are okay with that draft as submitted?
Yep.
Okay, very good. Moving right along then. Last thing under budgets and annual meeting, wanted to show you guys a draft of what the warning was going to look like, as well as the ballot for this year. These are going to be in a little different format than what we have done historically because we're doing this by Australian ballot vote. And that has changed some of the articles and also just some of the format and how the language is put together for both of these documents. And, you know, if we were physically meeting, I would hand you copies of these things. We just got the approval for these this afternoon from our attorney, Jesse Bugby. So he has reviewed these and has given his blessing, has signed off on these documents, but wanted to be able to have you guys see them, you know, before they went to print in the annual report, just so you had an idea what these were going to look like. So this is the notice and the warning. Couple of different things on this. One is we typically have a separate notice from what the warning looks like. Because of the way we're doing it this year with the Australian ballot vote, our attorney recommended doing a notice and a warning together as one document. So this is the warning. It's also the notice, and it's all going to go into the newspaper so that people will see that all together, and we'll see the articles all together in there. One document, notice and warning. You will also notice that there are less articles than we typically have in our warning. The reason for that is we took out a number of articles that we typically have in our warning when we're having an annual meeting from the floor, in order to try and streamline this and make it less confusing to voters. We have a number of articles. I think you guys are aware that it's not that they don't mean anything, but they're a little redundant in terms of what the Board of Trustees actually has permission to do under state statute anyway. But we in this municipality have continued to keep those articles in there, just sort of to, I think, to keep the public involved, keep them engaged, and, you know, encourage more participation, but they don't actually need to be in there. So these are things like, I'm reaching for our annual report from last year, just to give a couple of examples of, you know, what's in there normally that's you're not going to see in this warning. So things like to receive and act on the reports of the village officers for the past year, that's not in this warning. It doesn't really have any effect to the budget or any of the decisions that are being made about actions that the village is going to be taking in the upcoming year. It's just sort of like an opportunity for people to, you know, participate and chime in and give their 2 cents about, you know, what they think about the reports that each department has submitted respectfully to the annual report. So that is not in there. To see if the village will authorize the trustees to borrow in anticipation of taxes for 2020. Again, you're under state statute, you have that authority anyway. Most municipalities in the state have removed language of that nature from their warnings. But in our case, we've continued to keep that in there, just as, you know, an effort again to keep the public engaged. But you actually have the authority to do that anyway under state statute. And there's several other articles that are in our typical warning when we're operating from the floor, and have the ability to answer questions from people as they may come up regarding those articles, so there's no confusion about them. Because we're doing this by Australian ballot, though, it you know, it could leave some people feeling a little confused as to, you know, how they're supposed to vote on those sorts of things, and does it really mean anything at the end of the day? You know, if they vote no on those things, people have always, at least since I've been here, people have always voted yes to support those articles. But sometimes they do have some questions about them, just want some further explanation as to why they're in the warning, which we gladly give to them. But because we're not really going to have that opportunity under the Australian ballot system, after talking with our attorney, we paired those things out. So the articles are more direct, to the point, and really just business oriented. So, and you'll see also, which we typically don't have in the articles, the Matt, if you could go back up to the articles. Thank you. You'll see we've got also the elected officials counted in the articles. That's the first article under Article 1. So all of the elected officials, 2 trustees for a 3-year term, clerk for a 1-year term, treasurer for a 1-year term, moderator for a 1-year term. All those elected official positions will be on the ballot. And they're usually voted that way because we have a hybrid system, but everything else is voted from the floor, but our elected officials are voted by Australian ballot. This year, because everything is being voted under Australian ballot, those elected officials are actually on the warning. So I wanted to point that out to you guys as well. But then you've got the other things in here too. You've got the vote for the road paving projects, which we just finalized there. So that's $282,000 total, with a description of what streets would be covered under that amount. You've got the sidewalk appropriation under Article 3. You've got the appropriation of Franklin County Industrial Development Corporation. You've got the appropriation for holiday lighting in the downtown area, the appropriation for the patriotic banners. Then the big question to see if the village will vote a budget on the grand list to cover the 2021 village general fund. So we do need to make one change in that before it goes to print. We need to actually put the dollar amount for the general fund expenses in here, the amount to be raised by taxes. We actually have to put that dollar figure into that article. So that's one change we'll have to make from what you're seeing in this draft here. And we did keep under Article 8 to see if the village will authorize the necessary use of surpluses within departments, provided those funds stay within the Department of Origin. We did keep that one in there. And then the other items, as Matt was scrolling down through this, have more to do with like checklist availability, what voters should do if they want to get an absentee ballot, things of that nature. And those are printed in here as well as part of the notice and the warning. So any questions on that?
Just being so different, Jesse said that it is still legal.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he reviewed all of this. And this was his recommendation of how to format it and structure it, given that it is going to be such a change from the way we normally do things, you know, going from a floor vote to Australian ballot vote just for this year.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, Matt, are you able to pull up the ballot itself? Wanted to show the board what the ballot is going to look like as well. So here's a draft of what the ballot, the actual ballot will look like when voters get this. So you can see the first part of it under the first article, Article 1, the election of officers. It's got everybody here. Sam and Leonard, your names are on here. We have not received any other requests from residents to be on the ballot. Andy is going to run again for treasurer and clerk. Pat Hayes is going to run again for moderator. And those are the elected positions. And then you've got each of the articles following there as listed in the warning for people to vote on. And it has to be a yes or no vote. That's the way all of the questions are structured. It's either yes or no. So that gives you an idea of what the, well, not an idea, that is what the ballot is going to look like. That's the draft. I don't think there are any changes on the ballot that are going to be made. We do need to make just one change on the warning under Article 7 to add the actual dollar amount of the amount to be raised for taxes under that general fund vote. But other than that, the warning and the hearing is going to be as you just saw, as was presented. So any questions on the ballot? Okay, I think that's it then. That's the last bit that I wanted to cover under the budgets and annual meeting. We do need signatures from the Board of Trustees on the warning. So, and also on the trustee report before it gets entered into the annual report. So if the board could make time, you know, in the next week or so to come in and sign those 2 documents as well. So we got everybody's signatures on them. Would be much appreciated. If you need us to run them around to you, don't hesitate to call. I mean, I don't mind driving it up to you guys if that's what's going to work best. If you just don't have time to come down to the office, I'm happy to, meet you at your home or wherever is convenient for you to get your signatures. Okay. All right, great. Thanks, folks. I appreciate it.
So before we move on to Sqrp report, I just want to personally thank all the staff for all the hard work and the budgeting process and the yearly meeting process. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Much appreciated. Has been interesting, hasn't it, this year? A lot of changes. Everything's a little bit different than it normally is this year because of the pandemic. And hoping next year, we'll all be in a better space and things will start to get back to normal.
Sure. Okay, let's move on to Sqrp report.
Okay, so as the board is aware, Sqrp report is a document that is required by the Public Utility Commission for us to have once a quarter on the agenda. There are a couple of items where we are above our baseline. This is coming down to this is the last quarter of the year for 2020, and we did have a couple of items we were over on. One is the long time severity for worker safety performance measures. If you look under that, our baseline for that is 18 days, and we've got 56 days in there. That is due to the injuries that were sustained by Alan Plouffe in his accident the end of August. So we were over on that criteria. And then under the CATI numbers, CATI stands for Customer Average Interruption Duration. So this is basically a time duration on a per customer basis for an outage. We ended up for the end of the year being over on that that performance measure as well. Our baseline for that is 1, and we ended up being at a 2.9. So it's likely we will receive a fine from the DPS come springtime because we went over on those 2 performance measures. I just want to point that out to you guys. There's no real material effect to that. The fines that they levy are usually something like that in the couple $1,000 range. But the way our tariff reads is that if we do get a fine under any of the Sqrp requirements, the fine money gets paid back into the electric department and is used for additional tree trimming services. So it goes back into our tree trimming line item within our electric department. So we don't actually lose any money if we do end up with a fine, which is good. That's nice to have that feature in our tariff. So it's, I mean, it's not good. We always strive to, do our best in all of those categories, but we did go over on a couple of those performance measures this year. It looks like, the accident with Alan is what put us over on the employee injury timeout, and then the CATI numbers. It's kind of, all those kinds of things, the CATI numbers and the safety numbers they're weather related, and they're also circumstance related. When you have people that drop a tree on a line, for example, which is what happened to us last week when we had that system-wide outage. That wasn't actually our line, but it was a line that was owned by Vermont Electric Co-op on their transmission line that feeds our entire distribution service territory. So our entire system went down. You know, there was a logger that wasn't paying attention to what he was doing, and he did a lot of pretty severe damage. Those are things that are out of our control, you know, and it happens sometimes. We've had a lot of accidents in the past 12 months with agricultural equipment too. You know, we've had agricultural equipment where people just were driving down the road and weren't paying attention, pulled a line out accidentally. We've had several car accidents this past year where, you know, people ran into telephone poles and took them right out. Had one actually right in front of the office here on St. Albans Street back in July. They snapped the pole in half. So, you know, those kinds of things, unfortunately, we can't control. We do our best to get them rectified as soon as they happen. But, you know, when you snap a pole in half, it takes some time to get that replaced and get the lines reattached again. So anyway, just wanted to make you guys aware of the Sqrp report for that final quarter of 2020. It's something we're required to do every quarter on the agenda. So thank you very much.
Okay. Do we still have Jim for a Enosburg Initiative report?
Yes, one sec, please. Can you hear me now?
Yep, I can.
Yes.
Yes.
Evening.
Hi, how you doing, folks?
Good.
I'm in the world of bad technology. I sent a note to Matt if it's fallen off a couple of times while I've been listening. And so if it falls off again, respectfully, I'm just going to send an email to John and to Matt, and they can distribute it to you folks. I won't take a lot of your time anyway. Okay, I don't think. And I think there's a 3 or 4 second delay. Is that about right? Whatever. Oh, okay.
Yeah, give or take a couple seconds, Jim.
Yeah, okay. So there's always things that are going on that seem easy or they're just happening. And so they're out there. The Historic Society is working with it, as you know, with yourselves and the town. They're working on grants. The Opera House got a large grant, $50,000 bucks. We're going to put that into place this summer to help. They'll be hiring people and we'll be volunteering there as well. The Masonic Temple got another round of grants for their windows. So they got money to pay for the next elevation of windows. I don't remember anymore. It could be the east, probably is the east side windows will be all redone next year. And then there's only one more elevation to be painted. If you haven't been over to notice, Dave and Sally and others, Pierre Letourneau, put a new roof over the entranceway and put down pavers. I think they put down the pavers. If they haven't, they're there. And those were given or donated by the Fairfield Community Center. They had some stuff left over from a project, so they put that together. We did some painting this summer on the fence. Let's see, the Doughboy is out there for the grants. There's folks talking about flagpoles, which still hasn't been taken care of, or not taken care of, but a final plan hasn't been put together. Let's hope that as spring comes about, that things will be more energetic. We had our first, we let the Zoom meetings go at the end of the year on the holidays. We had our first one last week. We had 12 or 13 folks on the screen, so that was pretty good. We were having hybrid meetings, and so we've gone to just Zooms for now. Again, hopefully when the weather warms up, we'll go back to hybrid or whatever, but do that. And we're meeting, we also changed our meeting times. We had a recommendation, so we're trying that out to make it easier for people to jump on a meeting at 6:30 than 5:30. So those actually are all good and important things, and there's other things going on as well. But for sure, the most important thing to let you know about is and to put out as many facts as I can about what's being considered for the Pearly Block, the old pharmacy building in the middle of the village. in the last couple of months, all of a sudden there was several conversations that occurred. And you know, I can go, I'm not gonna, actually, I think for both of us, I'm not gonna go backwards, although it might answer some questions. I think what I'd like to do is just give you a synopsis of where things are now. And then if I learn from that no, I should have started at the beginning, I'll tell you. Or I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. And there's, we discussed this or presented this at the last initiative meeting. And then there's a planning meeting tomorrow and another site visit tomorrow. And here's the plan. The plan is this, is the board of the Franklin County Industrial Development Corporation is openly discussing buying that building. And buying that building for the purpose of doing a historic restoration on the whole building. And at this point, because of the way things have developed, putting back, creating a third floor there. And so that we'd have 3 full floors. And this is all part of a plan, not or part of ideas but close to a plan. And the outcome here is they would buy the building. We would renovate the 3rd floor. We've had 2 discussions with the whatever Lynn Coda's supervisory union district is. Their boards talked about it, and they're thinking Franklin Northeast, and they're thinking of renting the whole 3rd floor and turning that into office space. So there comes in the elevator that would, you know, they would drive the 3rd floor. We can still move ahead with our plan. It just gets scaled back for now. But they went to look at the building at the same time we were talking with the owner. I'd like to impress upon you proudly that this is very collaborative. The owner's involved in all the conversations. We're not talking behind this person or that person. Everybody's been invited to the table to try to figure out a way for something to happen. We've agreed on the sale price of the building. Back to the building, assuming the Franklin Northeast comes to the party, one of the obstacles there is they pay very little for rent right now, but they very much want to expand and have more space and want to be more central in their district, as been explained to me by is it Morgan?
Yes.
Yeah, it's Morgan, right? Their business guy. So then in that particular plan, the 2nd floor fundamentally stay the same. We would make some changes, but fundamentally stay the same. We toured one empty apartment. It was much better than I expected. Much nicer condition than I think I would have expected. And then what happens on the 1st floor right now is think about the storefronts and think about everything else. And what we would do is rehabilitate the front of the building to create 2 or 3 shallower storefronts. They might be 20 or 30 feet deep. The balance of the rear of the building and what is that warehouse now would become a childcare center. And it would become a childcare center that doesn't pay any rent. The whole program is based upon supporting a local community center of a number of kids there. And part of the profit, not profit, but the operating expenses calls for that to not pay anything. So the top floor would pay, the tenants would pay. If by snowball's chance in hell, we put the retail spaces up at a much less price, there's been a consternation in the community about getting rid of the retail spaces. To a point I get that, to a point I don't get that. The beauty of all of this in my mind though is that building is so big and so square, we have all kinds of opportunities. There's not, you can do a lot with the building. You're not limited because you don't have enough floor space. Tim has brought it to his board, his development board, and they've given 100% approval to move ahead with the idea. They've approved a small startup fund to hire an engineer, to hire an architect to sort of start laying things out. And then they're going to have a meeting on February 23rd and make their final decision. If they decide to move ahead, then we're all going to go for broke, and we would expect to buy the building in August and have it operational in the spring of 2022.
It's really exciting.
It's a lot of good and interesting and exciting news.
Fly skate back.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it's really
sounds
too
really good,
much for
Jim.
me. Yeah, it's outstanding on many levels. It's one of the, it would be a real expanse for Franklin County industrial development, and truly a model. I hate that truly word, but an absolute model for what other people could be thinking about doing. That an economic development arm doesn't just sit on its park, you know, its industrial park, and that's what it does. This is a significant expansion. We have 110% support from Tim Smith. And so we're working through the process. We're going to meet with his development committee, et cetera. We're going to use state tax credits. We're going to use federal tax credits. That's why we're looking at a July 1 or so, a July purchase, because we're going to be applying for state tax credits, and that's when they're issued. And that'll be an important part of the financing. It's a $1.8 million project if we do all 3 floors. If we do 2 floors, it's about 1.4, 1.3. So we have basically 2 fundamental formats. We have our biggest obstacle, and actually ties back into the one big obstacle that we can overcome, is the parking issue. That lot's actually quite large. And we have the municipal lot down the street at the Opera House. And at least from Morgan, there's no, oh, we're not going to do that kind of thing. He gets it. He's fine with that comfort level of people showing up that way and walking, 200 yards to work. It doesn't freak him out. The biggest, physical obstacle we have is the required green space. I don't know what it is sitting here, even though I should know, but there's a certain number of square feet per children. And so we need to deal with that. However, that's not, say again?
75 feet per child for outdoor space, 35 feet per child indoor space.
Yeah, I got that indoor one. It was the outside. That we're going to have a problem with that. What we're hoping for is, call it whatever you want, a variance or an abeyance, but we can create green space in the back. Well, at some point, you're welcome to show you, or you can look at the town records, obviously public. That's a big lot. And a lot of the parking that's used by Champlain Chevy, which will be an issue, won't be available because that could be part of our green space. We're going to take the position fairly strongly that we have access to the community park, we have access to the rail trail, and we'll have some limited green space in the back. It may not be that 75 square feet. We're not going to get that, Cindy. We are talking about a substantial center. We're not talking about 10 kids. We're talking 20, 30, 40 kids.
Right, well, you don't have to take them all out at the same time. You can just take out 8 at one time, yeah.
Yeah, correct. So we're going to, that's probably the only, oddly, what is the geographic problem we suffer there. I'm optimistic that we'll work things out. One of the reasons that this is doing what it's doing is that, if you remember a couple of years ago, we did have a bunch of conversations about childcare, and some people not on the screen were supposed to follow through on things, and that never happened. But I made a bunch of connections, and so I'm now, I'm involved in 3 or 4 childcare situations right now, where I just moved a childcare center. We met with Head Start today out of Burlington. They're moving into St. Albans with a 35, 40 kid center in St. Albans. And the city has the real estate, so they were there today. And then there's a YMCA center there that got flooded out, and we're working on a permanent home for them. For whatever it's worth to you all now, and I'm proud of it, this is all volunteer work for me right now. And my commitment to the board is that I'll get them to financing and permitting. We've been talking to banks, the SBA, all the different places that have to put this together. Now, Tim's no fool about that stuff, by the way. Tim Smith's no fool about that, but I have a different repertoire of how to get those things used and put together. And then, frankly, if it does come to pass, I'll build it for them. So I'll be the manager of that project and put it together. And I have the support of his board to do that. Everything we're doing is open book. They're seeing every number, every the item that's spent on. So there's no what happened here, what happened there. So end of February. So we're all moving ahead. Tomorrow is Fire Marshal Day and Structural Engineer Guy Day to make sure that we can do what we talked about the 3rd floor. Anecdotally, the third floor used to be an attic and part of a theater space that traveled down into the second floor. And that's obviously gone. So we just need to install some floor, hopefully just some floor joists and a few beams, and we can make that work. We put a new elevator on the back of the building. You won't see it. People would enter off of Main Street, drive to the side of the building, drop their kids off. There'll be a secure vestibule just inside the space where they can do all their COVID stuff. And then there'll be a place to separate out kids that have to be setting down while they're waiting for their families to come get them, or whatever else happens around the COVID thing. That's it.
That's exciting. We need more childcare availability, more slots. We definitely need
Yep.
more.
I'll send a report to John and to Matt for them to distribute, because I don't really have reliable emails for all of you. But Tim has a new pot of money, and I think it's worth at least putting it out there that that he's using some. He's got some money that came in that's COVID money for development of businesses, and he's using some of that for this. So he hired a person to put together statistics for Franklin County. And on all age ranges, half the need is met. There's 50% of the needs not met in Franklin County for infants, toddlers, the whole age range. Let's see. And so a lot of things have to happen, but it's just been moving forward. And then I know it's just news, but again, tonight, I don't know if you heard that state government, between the federal dollars that came in, gave the state a surplus. Governor was on the radio indicating that, and one of his top 4 priorities is childcare. So we're also going to expect a lot of help or push, if not money, but certainly push, the emotions of let's get through this, and why are you holding that thing up? Let's get this done so we can put it together. It's economic development, it's downtown, it's local wages, it's childcare. It's putting retail out at some rate that, looking at $700, $800 for a retail unit, which is peanuts, relatively speaking. It's not even the price of a 1-bedroom apartment, to start up your small business. So it covers all the bases. And if they don't get used, we do other things with that space, because it's just a big box. That's the beauty of that building. It's just, to me, when you look at the Quincy, or if you do St. Albans Health, it's all chopped up and there's all these constraints to what you can and can't do. And that building is just a clean slate. I could go on all night, as you know. If you have questions, go ahead. If not, I'll let you go back to your stuff.
That sounds good. I'm looking forward to some more good and exciting news like that.
That was good, Jim. Thanks for the
Yeah.
report.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. It's too good. It's just too good. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard a little bit about it at an SU
Thank
board
you.
meeting, and I've been dying to hear more. So,
Well, their dollars will be their issue, understandably. They're paying very little now. They also have to move out of Richford, and I get that pain. I also get their other needs. They know what we're looking for. We know what they can afford, and they've given not a nod, but they said they want to continue to talk. Morgan's coming to the walkthrough tomorrow.
What time's the walkthrough?
Okay. Right now it's at 2:15 or 2:30. We're going to meet in the main building, and anyone's welcome to come.
Thank you.
Anyone is welcome to come. Okay.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks. I'll sign off.
Have a good evening.
Thanks, Jim.
All right, next on the agenda, we have manager's report.
Okay, thank you, Sam. It's come to my attention last week that FERC has sent a letter to the Center for Disease Control requesting that utility workers be moved into phase 1 for vaccine access for the COVID-19 pandemic. That has been followed by the Department of Energy sending letters to all states and territories requesting similar commitments in state plans. To date, however, I have not heard any changes to Vermont's age-based vaccine plan, but we'll keep our ears and eyes open to see if the governor decides to take any action on the recommendations from the Center for Disease Control. That could move our employees up quite a bit on, the priority list for getting a vaccine if it's determined that utility workers should be considered in that first phase or not. Next, I wanted to let the board know that I wrote a letter of support for a grant application that Northwest Regional Planning Commission is putting in. So attached to the manager's report, you'll find that letter. I was asked to provide it to NRPC, as I mentioned, for a grant application they're putting into what's called the Better Places Grant Program. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough time with the grant deadline for me to formally bring the request in front of the board, but it was my belief that you would probably want this letter of support to be written. So I went ahead, made the call, and sent it in, wrote a letter, and sent it to Greta Brunswick at NRPC. So the grant itself would be to create a mural along the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail. They have a property owner that is interested in being a part of this kind of project. It would be on the Sherwood Real Estate building on Main Street. And if you can picture it, that building also sits right adjacent to the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail. So it's kind of, right on the corner of Main Street and the rail trail. And the mural would be on the side, the outdoor side of the building that faces the rail trail. So people could see it, as they're walking down the rail trail as well. And they'll be able to see it from Main Street too. Don't know a lot about what the mural will be. I don't think NRPC knows what it will be yet either. But Greta did assure me that that it would be done by a professional muralist. So I'm assuming they're going to have a hiring process that they go through where, hopefully they ask for examples of people's work so they can get an idea for, what their style, what their technique is. And so I just wanted to let you guys know that we'll have to see if they're successful in that grant application. As part of it, just as an aside, they're also looking at doing the same thing in Richford as well. So the grant will be for actually 2 murals, one in Enosburg Falls and a second one in Richford, also to be located on the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail in Richford. So we'll have to see if they're successful. Hopefully they are. Sounds like a very interesting project. And, I think if done well, if done tastefully, it could add a little bit to our downtown area to have a big, entire wall of a building covered in a nice mural. So,
John, can I just add a little bit to that, because I was I'm and CC'd on a lot of emails with that project.
Sure, you might know more than I do about it.
Because this kind of started off with another smaller project with the rec program and Vermont Youth Project and LEAPS. And they applied for a grant and they were not successful with that one. And then they're doing this one as well. But they're also collaborating with the school and the students. So like the art teachers at the 2 high schools and Cold Hollow, and their students are also part of this project. And the part of the intention is community collaboration as far as what's going to go on that mural. It's meant to be like really uplifting and community building.
Okay, that sounds good. I know the DRB is also interested in, what the final design would be. They've, I know, been in contact with Greta Brunswick to, let her know that they may reserve the final approval over what goes on that mural. They want it to be something of high quality that they feel will, add to the community, not detract from it.
Right.
So, and it can be done really well. In a conversation I had with Angela Wright when, she contacted me about this grant application too, and we had a discussion about it. And, I pointed out to her that, there are some really nice murals, even in small rural communities in Vermont that do exist. They don't have to just be in large urban areas. And I pointed out the murals in Cambridge that are on the silos. I don't know if you guys can picture that or not. In Jeffersonville, if you're coming into the roundabout area off from 108, there's some very nice, I think, very nice, attractive murals on 2 different silos that are right next to that roundabout area that have, just kind of a very mellow agrarian theme to them, farmers and landscapes. And I think there's one with some nice eagles on it. And, it doesn't have to be in that style exactly, but I just use that as an example of, how even in small rural communities, nicely done murals can, I think, add a lot. So, and then I did have a third thing on here I was going to report to, but I think it's better if I do that in executive session, given some things that occurred at a select board meeting Sam and I attended last night. So we'll save that item for executive session for the purpose of discussing in negotiations in which premature public knowledge would compromise the position of a municipality.
Okay, thank you, John. Before we go into executive, does anybody have any other business they'd like to discuss in open meeting? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing which negotiations, hold on.
Premature public knowledge.
Yes, premature public knowledge may compromise the position of the municipality and a personnel issue. Have a motion?
Make the motion.
Heather, the first, or the second?
I'll second that.
All right, it was a tie between Leonard. Yeah, we'll go with Leonard. Favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. All right. Okay, all the trustees are back. There was no action taken in executive session. If nobody has any other business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
Cindy with the first, so I have a second.
I second.
Heather with a second. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Unanimous. All right, everyone.
All right.